Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show. This is Sandy and Shawn. That is Sandy Clough. I'm Shawn Drotar, Danny Bailey behind the camera making everything work. Thank you for joining us today. We'll start the program. We'll get right into it. Big 12 Media Days wrapping up in Las Vegas, of course, for the University of Colorado, now part of the Big 12, the 16-team Big 12 that no longer has Oklahoma and Texas. It's now a conference that sort of has a situation that's in flux, much like the Buffaloes themselves. In their second year under Deion Sanders, the idea is a bowl game has to be the goal. And we've talked about this before. Since the day he was hired, I thought that a bowl game in the 2024 season following that would be the right choice and would be showing real, tangible growth. Deion Sanders had an opportunity to talk yesterday and talked a little bit about how his wins are, quote, different, something that you alluded to yesterday. And if you missed any part of the program, you can always go find that at milesports.com or right here on this YouTube channel and check it out. But he had a chance to talk about some of the situations with ESPN as well and alluded to what some of that actually means.
We're here with Deion Sanders at Big 12 Media Day. You've been very blunt today, Deion. You plan to win this year.
You want me to be different?
Of course not.
Who don't plan on winning? Is any coach that came here don't plan on winning? Like you said it like it was a newsflash. You're darn right I plan on winning.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this then. How do you define success for Colorado football in year two?
Academics. We've tackled that. We're tackling that as well. Character, just those guys outside of the building, making sure they're not doing anything stupid and they're being great young men, great people, assets to the community. We're being dominant on the field. We're doing some wonderful things on the field as well as in the community.
So is it a bowl? Does that define success? Is it a conference championship?
Football-wise. You said football-wise. No, because we're always measured differently. We would never fulfill your thought process. Just say, for instance, we go to a bowl. Well, they should have won 2 more games. They should have been in that bowl, but they gave away that lead. It's always going to be something. We know what success means to us, and we'll keep that in-house.
All right. Fair enough. You open on Thursday night against North Dakota State on ESPN. Yeah, tough opening game. You have 43 players from the portal. You have 2 new coordinators. What can we expect opening night, your identity to be on both sides of the ball?
We're going to be truly physical, offensively and defensively. We're going to be able to run the football. We know we can throw the heck out of it. We have the number 1 quarterback in the nation. We can throw the football. We're going to be able to run the football with tremendous physicality as well as stop the run. Once we stop the run, we're going to become relentless. We have a plethora of athletes that can really go find that football on the offensive side of the ball as receivers, running backs, as well as in defensive secondary and linebackers. We're fast. We have some athletes that can get the job done, some pass rushers that are relentless. We just got to stop that run.
They are fast. We know that the athletes they've been bringing in again in year 2, our speed has been a big part of it. Interesting comments there. There's a few things to unpack. One, the idea of focusing on the run, on running the ball and stopping the run. 2 problems that CU had last year. Pat Shurmur has called offenses that are run heavy. Whether that happens here remains to be seen. But I think there is interesting growth in the idea that in year 2, the understanding with potentially 7 new starters on the offensive and defensive lines, this was issues for both sides of the ball for the Buffaloes that they're looking to shore up. But when you talk about the difference in wins and meeting the expectations, we heard Deion start by talking about the GPA, which, by the way, the cumulative GPA for CU's athletics has never been higher. This was the 2nd highest GPA teams have ever had. And I get it. That's something that teams and coaches of all stripes may focus on a little bit more when that's good and the wins are not. But I think there's something real about the idea that the hype itself about Deion Sanders that he generates cuts both ways. And there is something real about the idea that the Buffaloes were somehow terrible last year. They went 4-8. Look, it didn't go the way they wanted, but they were 3 games better than they were the year prior. And 6 of the 8 losses were by single digits. It's not as if it was a disaster. And I do wonder if the hype is obscuring real, tangible improvement.
I take away a couple of things. First of all, Pete Thamel is a terrific reporter and a very good writer. I thought that interview was close to worthless not because of Deion Sanders, but because of especially the first question, Pete Thamel. Oh, you were very blunt today. You plan to win this year. That gets Deion off and running. How do you plan on improving this year from 4 wins to 6 in the same way you improved last year from 1 win the previous year when you weren't here to 4? Would have been a better opening question. And I imagine Deion would have gone through the laundry list that he outlined about how faster they are and so on. But Deion, who's supposed to be different, then says, well, I'm the same as everybody else. Everybody here, and he's right, everybody here, every coach here thinks they're going to win.
Right.
There's 16 coaches. There's 16 teams now in the Big 12. There's 16 coaches that they're going to win. I mean, it's a worthless question. I still want to know, why are the wins different for Deion Sanders than they are for anyone else? And he set up a hypothetical where if they had won 6 games last year, people would have complained that they should have won 8. Really now, where is the evidence for that? Where is the evidence in print or over the airwaves, on social media, anywhere, that had they won 6 games, there would have been a hue and cry? From where? Boulder? The national media that largely fawned over Deion last year, even while they were losing 8 of their last 9 games? This is the kind of statement that is allowed to pass without challenge and serves to excuse and obscure what happened in the last 9 games of last year. And that's what bothers me. Another point, though, more closely connected to what you're getting at. It occurs to me that we talked for 2 years, and last year it was the only thing to talk about. We've talked for 2 years about the player turnover.
Mm-hmm.
How much have we talked about the massive coaching turnover from last year to this year?
Yeah.
Hardly at all.
We
right?
have talked about this.
We've talked about it some,
but it has
not
really bubbled up
nearly as much
right.
as we've talked about.
New
43
offensive coordinator,
transfers coming
new defensive coordinator right off the bat.
Right.
That's pretty big when Deion Sanders is not a play caller himself on game day.
2 new coordinators, and it kind of gets glossed over. Yes, we've addressed it, but not in nearly the same terms as we've applied to the 23 transfers coming in and the 51 who left, which, by the way, constitutes roughly half the people who were brought in last year, supposedly significantly better than the people they were replacing from the 1-11 team. Half those guys got run off or were so upset with their standing that they didn't feel it was worth coming back to Colorado anymore. And a lot of those guys, including 5-star recruit Cormani McLean, I think Dylan Edwards was 4-star maybe, 4-star recruit. He's supposed to be a star running back.
He was your starter.
He left.
Yeah.
He not only leaves, he goes to Kansas State. If I'm not mistaken, CU plays Kansas State this year.
In conference.
So he wasn't afraid. He wasn't afraid of the eye. He knew all that when he left and went to Kansas State. He obviously has a lot of confidence that he'll be able to come in here on October 12th and show CU that they made a massive mistake. And as you noted yesterday, when Deion Sanders was talking about his offensive personnel, never once did he generally refer to the running back position or specifically to any single running back.
Although today he did talk
about,
we heard just the clip today that he was talking specifically about running the ball in the power running game.
In the most general of ways,
in the general term,
physical, and that has more to do with the offensive line than it does with the running backs.
I agree with that.
And I think this is a point that we need to understand. I'm not sure that the coaching staff turnover isn't a bigger issue and will have more of an impact than the player turnover. Now, we can get into the idea of team building and program building in terms of player personnel and whether the way he does it is sustainable. But that would take several years. And a lot of data that we don't have after just one single season with Deion as head coach. But isn't it strange that so many of the coaches he brought with him from Jackson State left? Two recruiters, their two lead recruiters, both left.
Mm-hmm. Well,
both left.
Here's what I would say about that. And I think it is interesting. And one of the things that's difficult to look at this CU situation is without separating the Deion Sanders situation from the new reality that defines not only NCAA football, but collegiate sports. Remember, right now as we speak, there are thousands, literally thousands of baseball players in the transfer portal after that season has ended. There were thousands of women's basketball players in the transfer portal. So separating what Deion Sanders does in the transfer portal from what happens in the NCAA now at large is problematic, because to look at it and say Deion's doing something new, that's true, but everybody right now is doing something new. But when it comes to the coaches, I'll at least look at Shawn Lewis, who quit his job as the head coach at Kent State to be the offensive coordinator at Colorado. There was no question about that. The reason he did that, is the reason anyone would do it, is because he's angling for a better head coaching job than Kent State, which he got. And when he got to San Diego State, you weren't going to give up a head coaching job to be a coordinator unless you had sights on being a head coach at a better spot.
Well, so and you're also coaching for a charismatic head coach who's going to allow you to coach.
Right. You will call the plays.
The problem was not that Deion Sanders didn't allow Shawn Lewis to coach. The problem was Shedeur Sanders.
It does feel like that was the case.
Allow Shawn Lewis to coach him.
Yes. In Charles Kelly's case, that's a bit of a surprise because obviously great background coming from Alabama.
Well, Charles Kelly will be missed, I suspect, a lot less than Shawn Lewis is missed.
Because
all you think of when you think of Charles Kelly last year was running up and down the sideline, screaming, tearing his headset off, exposing his bald dome to the public. At least you wear a hat.
Those could be very handsome.
You wear a hat.
Some people like that,
But it just going crazy on the sidelines when it was his fault that there were too many men on the field over and over and over and over again, well into the season. That's my lasting image of Charles Kelly here. I don't think he'll be missed. The offensive coordinator, I do think, will be missed.
Yes, because we do know what Pat Shurmur is, and what he is bland.
We've seen Pat Shurmur as the offensive coordinator for multiple seasons with the Denver Broncos. And to call their offense bland would be crediting it as being more dynamic than in fact it was. If there is a blander version of bland, that was Pat Shurmur's offense.
Well, the Buffs will get going in just about 6 weeks, and we'll find out how that season comes along. It will be a telling one, obviously, and we'll talk more about Shedeur Sanders, maybe the guy that makes it all go, in just a moment. But I want to remind you that if you're following any of the local teams, we have the best podcast for you, all in one place, from the folks who are there in the locker room talking to the teams.
Thank you for subscribing to the Shawn and Sandy Show, the Sandy and Shawn podcast.
That sounded good the way you had it.
Well, I thought you'd like that. I thought I'd throw that in at least once because it's virtually interchangeable.
Very kind of you.
We thank you for all that, listening to our show on demand whenever it fits your schedule. And we know many, if not all of you, are doing it that way. But we have plenty of other podcasts. Ryan Blackburn, our guest earlier this week, keeps you up to date on the Nuggets with the Pickaxe and Roll podcast. We've got Eric Dean also on with us earlier this week talking Avs. Check out his podcast at Hockey Mountain High. Mile High baseball fans know where to get their information on the Rockies. Drew Kreisman and the 20th and Blake podcast. And all questions relating to the Broncos can be answered by the Broncos podcast. Troy Renk, our friend from the Denver Post, featured on the Mile High Sports Podcast Network. All that and much, much more right here at Mile High Sports. Just search Mile High Sports wherever you get your podcasts.
Speaking of Cody Roark, we'll have him in just a little bit to talk about the Denver Broncos, but we stick with the Buffaloes for a moment. And Shedeur Sanders' hype might be a little bit through the roof. Not all of it, though, is in actuality the case of the real-life football. What's happened is, surprisingly, the first time in 14 years, the college football video game is back post-NIL world. In fact, the the suits behind those in both the basketball and football games almost 20 years ago now at this point are in part and parcel what led to the NIL world right now in the NCAA. But Sanders is rated in next week's game when it releases as the best quarterback in college football, just slightly higher than Quinn Ewers and Carson Beck. Of course, these are subjective ratings that are just a sort of a summary of a bunch of small ratings. And, we can get into that anytime you'd like. I consulted for a while for EA Sports for more than 15 years on their football product. So I can always tell you how that one works. But it's a bit of an overstatement, but the hype is very real. And Sanders had, of course, the very good year. He certainly had toughness, and he certainly headlined a team that was on national television a lot. Obviously, he has to be able to get better to get the Buffaloes where they would like to go to a bowl. But my question is this, and it's a little concerning for Buffs fans. What's the priority? Is the priority for the Buffaloes, from the outside looking in, to get Shedeur Sanders and to a lesser extent Travis Hunter drafted in the top 10 of the NFL draft? Or is it more important to get the Buffs to a bowl? And do the two things have to work together? If the Buffs have a season where they don't make a bowl and Shedeur Sanders puts up roughly the same stats, is he still a top 10 pick? Do these things have to happen together? Or is there the possibility that one might be the larger priority than the other?
I don't think Shedeur Sanders this year has to prove himself as a talented quarterback. He's a first-round talent. Now, will he be the first or second pick overall, as his father sometimes suggests, or a top 5 pick?
It's quite possible.
His father is feeling a little less. We'll see. But I think what he does have to prove to scouts and to teams is that he is coachable. And I don't think he proved that last year. Did he prove he could play last year, that he had talent? Yes. I'm a little concerned. I wasn't so much at the beginning of the year when they were winning, because I thought everything he did, including the taking of some sacks in the first 3 games, completing such a high percentage of his passes. Yards per pass numbers were terrific. Touchdown passes to interception rate, very good, exceptional. They were all year.
9-1, right?
He was 28 touchdown passes and 3 touchdown rushes versus 3 picks.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Is that the deal? Is that the deal? Making those numbers work in his favor from a scouting perspective? Or, as his father now says, they have to run the ball a little bit.
Well, that's the catch. Play action ends up being part of it. Running the ball needs to be part of it. Shedeur Sanders needs to understand he's not going to pass at that crazy high rate if things are going well for the Buffs. If they're not trailing, if they're not having to back up. Look, you can get big numbers and you can get drafted high. Look at J.J. McCarthy, who threw for over 200 yards, only a handful of times, over 200 yards.
Well, nobody expects them to be Michigan because right. Deion can talk about a physical running game. Michigan runs the ball like no one else.
If you have a team that is effective on offense and you're winning and you're still the trigger man of that offense, NFL teams are not going to downgrade you for that, even if your stats aren't outlandish.
No. I agree with that. I'm just wondering, because there is such an individual focus on Shedeur.
Yeah.
And I think more so than there is about Travis Hunter, who is truly unique among all college football prospects.
I think he's the best athlete in college football.
He almost has to be by definition, in the sense that he is a regular as a wide receiver and he is a regular as a cornerback. I think he'll be a cornerback in the NFL on more or less a full-time basis. But
you talk about Shedeur Sanders in the video game as the top guy. Yeah. Travis Hunter is one of the guys on the cover of the game. They know where the bread's buttered.
Travis Hunter is a star, gets a lot of exposure, at least for the first 3 games. We all know that CU will be on national TV.
Right.
Beyond that, we're not so sure. There are a lot of TBDs on the schedule right now in terms of game time starts and network coverage. I think they're on ABC late in the year on the day after Thanksgiving, if I'm not mistaken. On November 29th, they have a morning start at Oklahoma State, or here actually.
But they're
Boulder
going
against
to
Oklahoma State. But they'll be featured often enough. I just wonder where the emphasis will be placed in running up his efficiency stats, in particular, completion percentage, touchdown to interception ratio, as opposed to doing some things that are less spectacular, less appealing from an aesthetic point of view in terms of winning. Let's say the defense is, in fact, much improved over last year. Well, you don't go into every game thinking you have to score 30 points just to stay in the game.
Right. Of which,
and
by the way, they lost
the
games in which they scored 30 points or more.
They did.
The question about accuracy is interesting, too, because there were some assertions, I think they're silly for a lot of reasons, but there's some assertions that Sanders was taking sacks, and he led the FBS in sacks with 52, rather than throw an incompletion because the completion percentage was important to him. I think watching him play, I think that's ridiculous. The guy's a game where he wants to make plays.
I
think
rejected it early. Not so sure. The second half of the year, I'm just not so sure.
Today, ESPN brought up a pretty fascinating stat on Get Up, the idea that the Buffs offensive line, which was bad, no question. 4 new starters on the line are coming, only Hank Zaliskas, the center, will be returning, at least per Deion Sanders, as a starter, one of the guys he mentioned by name. But the Buffs offensive line last year had a missed block rate, of 55%. If you flipped a coin, you had worse odds of getting past than you did getting past the Buffs lineman. So, I mean, obviously that has to get better. But Sanders is a competitor, and I think he does like looking for the big games. He had an opportunity to talk on media days as well, and he talked about the idea that because Colorado has the hype, because Colorado is on television as much as they are, and they haven't been one of the blue blood schools in the last generation, that has made the opposition circle the Buffs on their schedules.
In terms of him operating with a certain obligation, does that sort of flow over to you as his son and being in the spotlight, as you just answered, that it's a different level in how you feel you have to perform? Do you have an obligation to perform at a different level?
It's been that since day one. I remember first media day when I was in HBCU, I said, we won't lose a game. I'm undefeated in the SWAC, so I already know what the expectation comes with. I know we're everybody's Super Bowl, so I'm really just I always stay level-headed, stay grounded, because I would never want to be that guy, look back, and not being able to take advantage of the moment that we have right now.
I hear a guy that, especially talking about his record with Jackson State, that does value winning and that understands as a quarterback.
And I wish he had said we. I won. No, the team won. Now he's a big part of that, maybe the biggest part of that.
Yeah.
But there is, again, that focus on the individual. And I don't see it with Hunter when Hunter talks. I don't see Hunter saying, I did this and I did that. It's
different
a
guy.
Very different temperament. It's a very different personality. And frankly, I think to a lot of people, it's more appealing. And I don't mind people being outspoken, especially quarterbacks. That goes with the territory. All quarterbacks have to have a certain level of confidence, and all quarterbacks take, at times, more praise than they deserve and more criticism than they deserve. Witness what Chase Daniel said about Joe Burrow this week on a subject that had nothing to do with football. And Chase Daniel, who started 5 games in 13 years, took off after Joe Burrow and ripped him a new one. And it was absurd. In his first 6 starts in the NFL, Joe Burrow had more starts than Chase Daniel did in his entire career. Does Shedeur Sanders get criticized unfairly? Yes. Yes. Does he feel that the spotlight on him requires, at times, superhuman performance? I think he honestly does feel that way. Hey, I've got to lift my team, my entire team. And I think that's why he holds the ball at times longer than he should, that he does not throw in rhythm. And I think Shawn Lewis tried to break him of that habit, especially as the season wore on. Conference play began. Competition got tougher. No knock at TCU. They were in the title game the year before, but they weren't the same team coming back, save for a handful of guys. Colorado State and Nebraska were hardly juggernauts. last year. Colorado State should have made a bowl game, didn't. If Colorado State had beaten CU, Colorado State would have made a bowl game. And, of course, CU didn't make a bowl game. That would have been a feather in the hat of the Rams. We can get into that more in the coming days and weeks. But I do think he feels that pressure. And I think some of it is put on him by his own father, who says unequivocally, every time he speaks about his son, best quarterback in the country.
Shedeur Sanders talked
enormous
about
pressure placed on him by his own father.
Yeah, and the way they lost, I pointed out 6 of their 8 games by 1 score. Sanders talked about that yesterday and said, it's going to take one more touchdown. I feel like I've got one more touchdown in me after this offseason work. And that's, I think.
He had 31 last year.
That is such a interesting quote, because if this is where I think the Sanders challenge is a lightning rod, right? If he looks at 1-score games and say, I need to be better, I need to get us another score, right? There's going to be fans that look at that and say, okay, this is a guy that's willing to take on that load himself and try to get better, and talked about his offseason work, trying to get one more touchdown out of himself, and that's lifting the team. You can also look at it and say, oh, see, that's a me first thing. I've got to play hero ball. And it can be either or. And so to me,
it's not either or, though. It's not either or. To have that impulse is perfectly natural, in my opinion.
And I think it's
it is also a little bit self-destructive at the same time. He's not, as tough as he is, he isn't invincible out there.
No, as that out. He broke a vertebra in his back.
All the injuries he had last year that mostly he played with, until he literally broke his back and couldn't play. So I think, again, it's a lot of things with CU. It cuts both ways. And I think it's natural for him, in believing in himself, in believing that he has to not only lead this team, but carry this team. I think it's very natural for him to try to do more than he's capable of doing. And I know one thing: he doesn't like dead plays.
Right.
Doesn't like dead plays.
Nope.
And to him, an incompletion is a dead play, and an interception is even worse than a dead play. And you can say, well, a sack's a dead play too.
Worse.
But
it's worse than a dead play.
To him, and I don't know if he's been coached this way or not by his father or anybody else, sacks are vastly preferable to interceptions, and not really much worse than incompletions either.
Well, and that's an interesting concept. I'm not sure one that I agree with, but we'll find out what the Buffaloes do over the course of the season. Shedeur Sanders is almost certainly, barring injury, playing well, going to be a top 10 pick, maybe top 5.
How many passes did we see him throw away rather than take a loss? And the answer to that is not many.
And if he wants to be the top quarterback drafted in the NFL, making those decisions matters a tremendous amount to NFL decision makers. That's the kind of decision making they want in the clutch. And that's one of the things he has to improve the most. Well, we know the quarterback is going to be for the Buffaloes. We also know the quarterback is going to be for the Broncos. We've told you since day one. We told you since before he was drafted. The Broncos quarterback one is going to be Bo Nix. We'll talk about Nix, but not so much Nix himself, but the guys he's supposed to throw to and what they can do with Cody Roark in just a moment. But I want to remind you, as the weather is just gorgeous today, it's time for you to get out and play golf, and the city of Denver has the perfect golf pass for you, whether you're just getting started or if you played for decades. The practice and play pass is for those new to the game to practice what they've learned and transition it onto the golf course. They will learn and play pass 1.0, geared toward adult beginners, people that have never held a club before, or players looking to advance their game. If you've been playing a while, try the Learn and Play Pass 2.0. That's designed to be flexible for intermediate players looking to improve and fine-tune their game. So Denver Golf has a lot of ways to bring you, no matter where your game is, up to a level in which you can be happy and have fun playing golf on those terrific courses, whether you've never played before or whether you're just trying to get better. And let's say you're just trying to have some fun. The Friends and Family Pass lets you play mini golf or at the driving range. You can bring up to 3 guests with you every time you do it. Perfect for the family. Go have a little bit of fun. Even if you're not going to get into golf in the 18-hole variety, you can still enjoy being on the driving range and putt-putt with the family or friends or whatever, just for a little bit of fun. 8 unique courses and opportunities for all different skill levels and interests. Denver Golf is perfect for just about anyone. You can learn about everything Denver Golf has to offer by visiting cityofdenvergolf.com. Come home to play. Denver Golf is your neighborhood course. Bo Nix is going to be QB1. Period. We know that there was a wonderful little get together, as there often is, with quarterbacks and receivers. Jared Stidham is the veteran, put that together, but Bo Nix, Zach Wilson were there as well, some of the receivers. The idea for Nix's success also revolves around who he can throw to, and joining us to discuss it is Cody Roark, Mile High Sports, and the host of the Locked On Broncos podcast. Cody, thank you for the time. I know you are traveling, so we really appreciate it. But by this time next week, the Broncos rookies will have reported to training camp, and you look at the wide receiver situation. Start with Courtland Sutton, but after Courtland Sutton, everything is a question mark. Jerry Jeudy was traded. Marvin Mims has supposedly a larger role, but the guy that was second on the team in receiving touchdowns is Brandon Johnson, and I think fans might not know who he was if he was sitting in their living room. What makes you think this core of wide receivers will step up? Is there a particular player, or do you think they do it by numbers?
I think it'll be a numbers game for them. Obviously, this upcoming season, I'm a little higher on the Broncos receiver room right now than I think probably most people. I think with Courtland, with Tim, and this is all granted under the assumption that these guys stay healthy, right? Courtland, Tim, Marvin, the expanded role. We saw some things at OTAs and minicamp in terms of how Sean Payton planned to use him. Can't go into, quite detail on that. We're not allowed to, but I mean, if it pans out and everyone stays healthy, it could be exciting. And then obviously free agent acquisition, Josh Reynolds being thrown in the mix, was the most consistent receiver that we saw during OTAs, during minicamp. And look, he's not going to be the premier top option for them, but if he's their fourth option or even their third option, it could spell some really exciting things here for Denver's offense, which, look, their passing offense last year wasn't very effective in terms of generating passing first downs. I mean, it was almost like pulling teeth to be able to get a first down in the passing game. Now, while Russell Wilson's numbers from a touchdown to interception ratio were much better, their overall effectiveness in terms of being able to pick up first downs, sustain drives in the passing game, it wasn't very consistent. It wasn't very good. It was one of the bottom-ranked ones in all the National Football League. I think early on, from what I've seen from Bo Nix, operating under the assumption he does win the starting job, that is, I think you're going to see that carryover. I think you're going to see the Broncos still attack behind the line of scrimmage. I think you're going to see them be able to attack the short to intermediate at 5 to 15 yards. And then the deep ball. I mean, so many people talk about Bo Nix, he doesn't have the arm strength. I think a lot of these people will be very surprised this upcoming season to see how he gets the ball out of his hands, the trajectory, the placement, and also the velocity in terms of where he puts it to where only the receiver can get it. Saw that consistently during OTAs. And then, there's a wide variety of guys. I think they carry 5 on the active roster this upcoming season. It could be 6 if you factor in the new kick return rules that obviously the Broncos want to specialize in, especially if you don't want to put Marvin Mims in there full-time if he's got a bigger offensive role. Jalen Virgil is a guy that's going to be, you mentioned Brandon Johnson, little Jordan Humphrey, Michael Bandy, and under the radar name for Broncos fans to pay attention to is David Sills the fifth, number 87. You had a chance to see him a little bit during OTAs and minicamp. I mean, Denver has 3 proven guys here at wide receiver in the NFL. Hopeful that you can get Marvin Mims there. And then everybody else, I think there's unproven talent, which could excite people or it could fall flat.
Cody, you mentioned Josh Reynolds and talked about how if he was the fourth option or so, the Broncos would be in good shape. 40 catches, 608 yards, 5 touchdowns last year. All of those would have been second on the Broncos behind only Sutton. To my mind, he is the clear number 2 option. He's got to be the guy starting opposite, especially given the free agent situation. But it sounds like you may see things differently. If Reynolds is going to be number 4 in the pecking order, who's 2 and 3?
Well, I think it's going to be Tim Patrick and I think Marvin Mims. I think those are going to be your feature guys. And look, I think Reynolds could easily even be that third option. And another thing about Reynolds I want to make, note of here for fans is like, okay, well, what do you look at in terms of sample size? I look at how good were quarterbacks when they targeted him, like passer rating. And look, I think it starts back in 2021 when he was a member of the Tennessee Titans, the Detroit Lions. He kind of had 2 teams in one year. 90.2 as a member of the Titans, 88.4 as a member of, obviously, Detroit that one year. And then you go through and you see it, 95 passer rating for him in 2021, 99.5 in 2022. And then last year, Jared Goff had a passer rating of 113.3 when looking Josh Reynolds' way. And look, he's a role player. He's a guy that's not going to be asked to be your number 1 option. But I think when you can have him step up in that type of situation, I do think that he will come up big. But I do think, look, as long as Tim Patrick, who I thought looked really good during OTAs and minicamp, as long as he stays healthy, Cortland Sutton is healthy, I think there's going to be some production from that Broncos receiver room that we haven't seen in several years. And look, I know we're banking on the fact, hey, we hope everyone could stay healthy. Training camp obviously has been not kind to Denver the last couple of years in terms of season-ending injuries.
There's that. And for all that you and Shawn both described, there is still the question, who can stretch the field? It's not Tim Patrick. It's not really Cortland Sutton.
Not Josh Reynolds.
And it's not Josh Reynolds either. Who can stretch the field and be a legitimate and semi-regular threat at the wide receiver position?
I think Marvin Mims, quite honestly. And look, last year we saw in that one game, we saw him finally use downfield. It was, 2 catches, $113 and a touchdown. Second half, didn't see a single target after that against the Commanders when the Broncos blew that lead there. That was a frustrating game for a lot of Broncos fans. You have him, but not only is he going to be the vertical speed, deep ball type of guy, but I think he's going to be, Sandy, that guy that Sean Payton is going to work across the middle of the field. You're going to work him in space, and you're going to try to catch him the ball, get him the ball at around 7 to 8 yards, sometimes maybe even longer on deep drags. And then his speed's going to do damage down, the rest of the field. That's the vision here for Marvin Mims. Got to see a little bit of that during OTAs. And obviously, I think there are some exciting things coming up with Marvin. He's going to be one of the players to watch. So much of me wonders if they do carry the additional receiver, like I mentioned earlier, because of the fact, like, if Marvin's going to have a bigger role on offense, you need him there. You need him there considering the injury history of some of the other guys at the position. And you can have another guy. You could even have a running back or a guy like Jalen Virgil. You can have those guys return kicks for you and have those roles there specifically on special teams, even though Marvin is a legitimate option to be able to take a kick return back anytime he touches the ball. You want that dynamic, but if you have a bigger vision for the offense, I would protect Marvin from that.
Yeah, obviously, all pro level returner in Marvin Mims, one of the very few talents recognized at the end of the season. But Sean Payton's the same. Offensive coordinator Joe Lombardi's the same. I know the quarterback situation is different, but if this is the vision for Mims on an offense that was stagnant last year, why didn't he get the chance to do this last season?
Yeah, great question. I think there was a lot of differences, a lot of cooks in the kitchen, so to speak, in terms of how the Broncos offense is going. And look, I mean, there's a reason that they moved on from Russell Wilson, and Russ had a better year, but there were times where Russ wasn't meshing well with Marvin Mims. I know there was something that had come out last year about a fan talking to Marvin, and Marvin had said something like, he doesn't throw me the ball. And look, that was true. Like, there were times where Russell Wilson missed. I don't know how many times I went back on film and watched Marvin's wide open, or he's hitting a break, at the top of his route. The DB bites on it. It's like, wow, there's a big play there. There's a big opportunity there. Russ just didn't see it. I guarantee you a guy like Bo Nix is going to see that consistently. He's going to find him. I mean, if you look at Bo's tape at Oregon, I mean, even with Troy Franklin, his brother Tej Johnson, they did a lot of those things in terms of attacking the middle of the field and seeing guys that have speed breaking across the middle. That was not the element there. And look, even Sean Payton said we had so many different guys there. You had Cortland, who obviously was 10 touchdowns on the year, saw a high volume of targets. They were really trying to get Jerry Jeudy going because they wanted to see what they had out of Jerry. And Marvin kind of took a backseat on that. And Sean Payton said, hey, that's on me as a coach. That's on us as a staff. And we didn't do a good enough job. And I think there is a concerted effort this year that you're going to see Marvin Mims getting a lot of touches for the Broncos.
Not to belabor the point, but you're exactly right. That's the one subject on which Payton seems open to some semblance of criticism and entertains the question rather than dismissing it or the premise of the question out of hand. And my question is, first of all, you say there are a lot of different ideas and suggestions rolling around. None of them were coming from Russell Wilson. I think we can be pretty sure of that. Weren't almost all those ideas coming from Sean Payton, one way or the other. And Sean Payton himself said what you just said. Well, we had to make room for Jerry Jeudy. And my question is why? And when they had a chance to trade Jerry Jeudy in midseason and create more opportunities for Marvin Mims, I guess one win at Kansas City made everybody on the Broncos, especially in the wide receiver room, a virtual untouchable.
You wanted to milk it as much as you could, I think. Like if you're the Broncos, like for Jerry, they invested a high draft pick in him. You certainly saw the talent that was there.
This regime didn't invest that
Yeah.
high.
Yeah. And so they wanted to see like, hey, this is the last chance. We're going to see if we can do it. And unfortunately, like Jerry went on a stretch last year where he didn't have the greatest attitude. I mean, we all saw it on, and I like Jerry a lot. I wish him the best in Cleveland, but the Broncos tried to massage that personality a little bit. And unfortunately, it just didn't work out, didn't pan out. And now he's going to have an opportunity in Cleveland. But I mean, I think at this point, Sean Payton says, all right, we've seen what we've seen from it. Sean liked Jerry, but it's like, it's not going to work here. And they made that decision here, obviously before free agency, when everything was going on there to get rid of him.
Yeah, they didn't get very much for him, and they could have gotten more last October for him. Maybe.
I don't know. I mean, it's tough. It's tough because I think they were asking a second. They were asking for a second or a third. So at some point you just got to take the value you're going to get.
Cody, the situation with Courtland Sutton, obviously, when he reported to the mandatory parts of OTAs, it kind of got buried. But it's very clear that Courtland Sutton would like a new contract. And it's equally clear that Sean Payton is fully aware that Courtland Sutton would like a new contract and seems disinclined to worry about it all that much. Is this going to come to a head at some point? Or do you believe that it's just going to fade away and Sutton's going to let that slide and just play his contract out? That seems kind of unlikely, doesn't it?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, it's not the same situation, but if we're talking about a similar strategy that the Broncos could do, and you look at what the Raiders did with Josh Jacobs last year, right before training camp or at the start of training camp, what the Giants did with Saquon, they gave him something. And obviously everything else, like, there could be a situation where the Broncos do give him a little bit of money here, just a little bit more guarantee. That's really what he's looking for. When you look at the market, it's changing every year. And obviously now with Justin Jefferson making $35 million a year, look, the Broncos aren't going to pay Courtland that. Courtland's not asking for that type of money, but he wants to be paid somewhere around, I think, the $13 million per year range, which I think is fair coming off of his last year. But I think they give him a little bit now, right? It's just something that's like a middle branch between the two sides. And I don't know what that number is, but ultimately these two sides are going to have to agree on something. Courtland's not going to sit out and take the fines. I guarantee that. Like, he could do that if he wanted to. He's not going to do that. He's going to go out there and he's going to play. And then I do think there is a chance that if he does play well, you could see the Broncos trade him. But it could be under the notion that whoever they trade with has to agree with the new extension. Like we saw that with Bradley Chubb when Bradley's contract was expiring with Denver. There's so many different logistics that are going to go on behind that. And I think so much of us at training camp, we're going to be following. I know you guys are going to be there at training camp as well in the tents doing your show there. I think so much of what we're going to be looking at is who are some of the other receivers that are standing out, because if the Broncos don't plan on paying Courtland, they're going to have to look at life without Courtland in the near future. Tim Patrick's on 1 year left on his deal. This is it for him, and we'll see if he's obviously going to be playing for an extension as well. You want to see what your guys behind those guys have to offer, including Troy Franklin and Devon Vele.
One question that I have remaining, and it actually relates to something we haven't talked about yet. Defense. I have not talked about it yet. Last year, we won't get into deep metrics. They gave up 413 points. Only 5 teams gave up more points than 413. Most concerningly, they gave up 2.16 points per drive. Only 4 teams in the NFL were worse than that. They were number 1 in fumble recoveries on defense last year with 15, but that's a random stat. You could have a much better defense this year and not recover 15 fumbles. What is the idea, because they are interrelated, about not just the offense and what it can do on its own to improve, but in relation to a defense that will be playing without unquestionably its best defensive player over the past 8 years?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. They're losing really 2 of their guys. They lost 2 of their key guys on defense this offseason, and Josie Jewell at the second level, Justin Simmons on the back end, and they're really going to have to spread that out. And look, the biggest question for this team right now, and I wrote about it in my linebacker preview, obviously it's going to be coming out on milehighsports.com as we preview training camp. This is really the biggest question on the team outside of quarterback, is who's going to start next to Alex Singleton. What does that look like? Is the depth at that position good enough? For me defensively, I think that if Jonas Griffith emerges, he's 6'4". He's got the most freakish body type out of all the players right now, I'd say, at the linebacker position. Athletic, coming off the ACL, but he's got a lot of, he was moving well. He ditched the knee brace at OTAs. If he can find solidarity there, he's tall. Like, he's got the athleticism, the strength to do a lot of things that really excite me.
Yeah.
You look.
I want to jump in here and just get. I had forgotten this. There was a time when Jonas Griffith had beaten out Alex Singleton as the starter.
And those guys have started games together too. They started a couple years ago, Monday Night Football, week 1. They start because Josie Jewell was hurt. They started that Monday Night Football game against the Seattle Seahawks and Russ's return to Seattle. It was both those guys. I liked what I saw from them in that game. And look, obviously the end result is what it is in terms of the Broncos losing on a 64-yard field goal that they missed by Brandon McManus. But that's an intriguing level for them. I think, to be honest with you, they're going to look at a wide variety of guys at the safety position. Caden Stearns has made great progress in his recovery from patellar tendon surgery. Is sprinting, should be ready for the start of training camp. Brandon Jones, they brought him in the offseason. PJ Locke is a guy who really emerged last year for Denver, kind of what we saw a little bit early on in 2015, not to compare them in any way, shape, or form, but Denver used a lot of David Bruton, TJ Ward, and Darian Stewart. I guarantee you we're going to see them use a lot of these 3 safety looks with PJ, with Caden, and with Brandon Jones quite a bit. I think the biggest offseason addition for Denver that's going to help them at every level is John Franklin Myers. I think when we talk about a pressure player there at defensive end, he's going to allow DJ Jones to play the nose tackle position, Zach Allen at the other defensive end position, and it's going to free up more one-on-one opportunities, in my opinion, for your outside linebacker group. But I think he can be a force to be reckoned with on the interior. And if you look at his pressure rate since coming into the National Football League, it's very exciting. And the fact that the Broncos got him the way that they did, it's a little bit of a steal of the offseason, in my opinion. Has the potential to be the biggest impact move that they've made this entire offseason. And I think it will translate well to the linebacker play and also in the secondary.
And keep in mind, when you talk about a guy like Franklin Myers, the Broncos were the 3rd worst team in the league in giving up rushing yards, 137.1 per game. The defensive line play has to be better, getting DJ Jones back in the middle, where he was a proven run stuffer with the 49ers prior to joining the Broncos, is probably a big part of that equation. He is Cody Roark, the lead writer for the Denver Broncos on Mile High Sports and the host of the Locked On Broncos podcast. You can check those out wherever you get the podcast, and of course, get all of Cody's work, because training camp's going to be upon us. Again, by this time next week, rookies will already be at Dove Valley. So make sure you give Cody a follow and check out all the work he does at Mile High Sports. Thanks so much for the time, Cody. Appreciate it. Obviously, things are getting exciting. We have just a few more days, and then here we go. The NFL season's upon us.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. Thank you so much for having me, and I'll see you guys next week.
All right. Thanks so much, Cody Roark, joining us as we look at the Broncos. It is, to a certain extent, when we've talked about the roster and we've looked at the roster, and a lot of people have started to do their think pieces on rosters across the league, the Broncos roster is lacking, and it's lacking in playmakers. And obviously, we'll discuss a little bit about that. Cortland Sutton is one of them. And after that, it gets a little bit dicey. But I want to remind you that for the last 4 years, since online sports betting has been allowed in Colorado, you've heard the ads and seen the ads, probably overwhelmed by them when you're watching games. And like me, you can probably actually even recite some of them in your sleep. So we're going to add one more to the pile. But the idea behind that is this one is going to make those other ones easier, because Mile High Sports gathers all of the best sign-up bonuses and offers, and we put them on one single page on the website. We wanted to make it easy for folks who are interested in getting into sports betting to find the best options. So we researched them all and brought them all together in a way that makes it simple to know what's available. There can be bonus bets, second chance bets, deposit matches, all of those things in one place, because your situation is unique. What the best situation for you, only you know that. And so we want to be able to have you have a spot where you can shop all of the books and all of the offers so you can pick the best one for you. So here's how you do it. You visit milehighsports.com today, or you download our mobile app and then click on Colorado Sports Betting. All of those offers from all of the books will be arrayed for you to go ahead and sort through at your leisure and pick out the best opportunity for you to jump into the world of online sports betting. It's just that simple. Think of it as your bonus from your friends here at Mile High Sports. Sandy, the Broncos playmakers on offense, we talked about Sutton, and we talked about that with Cody a little bit. 10 touchdown receptions last year. Bill Barnwell, terrific NFL reporter, put together a piece yesterday where he looked at, we'll call them, and I use the air quotes if you can't see it, skill position players, right? As we know full well, that's really insulting the linemen who, if they're not doing their job, the whole offense falls apart. But nevertheless, we'll use that sort of anachronism for now. Well, Bill Barnwell ranked the Broncos 30th, and that in and of itself is not a shock. But his statement about it, quote, the offense was basically some magic catches by Cortland Sutton and little else a year ago. Ouch. And
That's
also,
right.
Sandy, it's right.
About right.
Because you think about even some of Sutton's touchdown catches. Some of them were pretty remarkable. And without that, the Broncos are absolutely abysmal on offense. And that's why when you look at Sutton's 10 touchdowns last year, you have to probably assume it's an outlier unless it happens again. Hasn't had a year like that in his career. And you're trying to look for other options. We went through the wide receivers, but obviously this team has to get a running game. It's the quarterback's best friend. Bo Nix is going to need a good running game if he's going to be successful. Javonte Williams is going to be first up. There is interesting talent. When you talk about Blake Watson, when you talk about Audric Estime, undrafted and drafted running backs.
Like them both.
Plus Samaje Perine is still on this roster.
Like
and
him too.
You look at the receiving yards,
He and
Perine's a
Marvin
bit of it too.
Mims. He and Marvin Mims were the two guys last year. Mims, maybe more so in the first half of the season, couldn't understand why he didn't get on the field. Jerry Jeudy was not ever here as a Denver Bronco proven receiver. He had a good 6-game stretch at the end of 1 year.
Yeah.
Right? And that was 2022 with Russell Wilson as the quarterback. They were already skeptical about Wilson last year, but about Jeudy, apparently that 6-game stretch was all they had to see to convince themselves that he was proven. And this was a new regime. They made a mistake on Jerry Jeudy. The new regime did. They didn't draft him. That may have been a mistake, perhaps even a bigger mistake.
Well,
but
it certainly looks like
they
now.
were the ones who let him play and let Mims sit. The second half of the season, yes, as a receiver, Perine got a fair share of run, but he came to Denver with the expectation that he would carry the ball, I don't know, 2.5, 3 times as much as he did.
Yeah.
What was the carry total last year? 53?
Not a lot of ball
if
carrying.
I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, when you're looking at Perine, obviously, and that's interesting because, Perine had 53 carries. You
Yes.
right, for 238 yards.
Fair to
and a
say he
touchdown.
expected to carry the ball a little more often than 3 times a
The
game.
4.5 yards per carry was notably better than Javonte Williams, who, of course, it felt like maybe was rushing back from significant knee surgery.
And overplayed.
And maybe overplayed. 774 rushing yards, a 3.6 per carry, 3 rushing touchdowns. That's a big drop off from the rookie year, 2021, in which he averaged 4.4 per carry. And that's where I looked at it too and think Perine is a veteran. He's your best blocker as a running back by a wide margin. He's been good on third downs to the points when even the Bengals were making their Super Bowl runs. Perine was the third down back, not Joe Mixon. So you know that he can not only block, he can catch, and he can carry the short yardage. The Broncos didn't use him, which is odd because Sean Payton was in charge when they added Perine.
Yes. Again,
But they're
one of
playing.
those mysteries. This regime had no built-in commitment to Jerry Jeudy.
Sandy, he was
and
third
yet they
on the team in
played him
receiving.
like he was their guy.
Perine was third on the team in
Yes,
receiving.
not Jeudy.
Not a tight end. Your third string running back who could barely get on the field was your third leading receiver.
No, he was number 2.
And Jeudy was 2.
Jeudy
And
was
he-
2.
and-
Okay,
yeah.
I stand corrected on that. But you said leading receiver. That's catches made.
Yes, and
That's
Perine
not
had 50,
impact.
and
That's not
Jeudy had
third
54,
down
59.
conversions.
Perine only had 9 fewer than Sutton.
So what I'm saying is, I guess, those were people I wondered about why they couldn't get on the field. There's another guy I wondered about too, off and on during the course of the season, and that was Jaleel McLaughlin,
5
who showed some explosiveness,
yards per carry.
something they
5.4.
desperately have needed on offense for close to a decade.
Yeah. 5.4. That's a big number. 410 rushing yards. McLaughlin now never had more than 9 carries in a game. It's a lot better than Ryan's, but never had more than 9 in a game. Joe Lombardi, the Broncos offensive coordinator, just about a month ago, almost a month to the day, as a matter of fact, June 12th, when going through OTAs, had a chance to talk about McLaughlin, what he needs to do to get better, and what they might have in store for him.
What have you seen from Jaleel McLaughlin so far? I remember a few months ago you talked about how he's got to improve in pass pro.
Yeah. I mean, one thing you know about Jaleel is he's going to work hard. I mean, whatever you ask him to do, he's going to work at it. So, you've seen that, obviously we're not in pads, so you can't see everything, but just as far as his intention and assignment on pass protection has been outstanding. And, I don't know if there's anyone that works harder than him. So he's just, his speed, his acceleration, his explosiveness has all been impressive this spring.
Exactly.
Now, the reality is in pass protection, Jaleel McLaughlin, what he can't change is he's 5'7", 185 pounds. That can be problematic. But Sean Payton has shown in the past with the Saints that he has been able to mix and match running back tandems effectively. Last year, it seemed as if they were trying to feel everything out between P. Ryan and McLaughlin and trying to figure out what they have in Javonte Williams. But this year, I would hope that there will be a little more creativity when it comes to the running backs, because I think if Javonte Williams continues to improve a year after surgery, there is room in situations for Williams and McLaughlin and P. Ryan, and arguably situations in which any of the two could be on the field at the same time.
And then you got, as you've mentioned, Estime
and Watson.
We're talking about a coach whose reputation throughout the years in New Orleans and prior to his coming here was that of being one of the most creative offensive minds in the league. And yet he couldn't find a way to get 3 seemingly productive players on the field more often last year. Productive in different ways. P. Ryan more as a receiver and a blocker than as a ball carrier. Jaleel McLaughlin had a good start, but then it seemed every time they put him in the game, it was a wide zone run.
Right. He was the play calling was too predictable.
Somehow teams
they
caught on to
that out. 38's on the field. Well, we know where he's going to carry. Yeah, the Broncos offense was really too predictable, and only so much of that can be blamed on Russell Wilson. Both Payton and Lombardi are going to have to step up and be creative for Bo Nix in his rookie season, because the truth of the matter is, are there talents on the Denver Broncos? Yes. Are there proven NFL playmakers? In my mind, you have one, Courtland Sutton. And by the way, he would like a new deal. And even he isn't exactly Amon-Ra St. Brown, who played opposite of Josh Reynolds last year in Detroit.
No, he is not. And the 10 touchdown receptions stick out, but there isn't a contending team in the NFL that would have Courtland Sutton as their number one receiver.
I agree with you. I think there are a lot of them would have him as the number 2.
Maybe,
but not as their number 1. I think that is the reality, and that's going to be a challenge for the Denver Broncos as they try to manufacture a season in which they try to approach that 8-9 they had last year and not take a massive step back, even though we've discussed, and we will continue to discuss this as training camp comes about, that this team could and probably will backslide in the record, but may still be better. But some of that has to be on Payton and show the creativity that his reputation certainly brought, but we didn't really see last year. And there's no more Russell Wilson to kick around and say, oh, my great creative designs were all foiled by my completely inept quarterback, who, by the way, was a borderline Hall of Famer before he came to Denver. No more scapegoats.
Yeah. I don't know right now if
he is not anymore. Not anymore.
Applies to his Hall of Fame.
He is in
possibilities.
That glorious Phillip Rivers world where, like,
well,
maybe
I'm not so sure that he has to rehab his image in Pittsburgh, and that's all fine and good. I can't think of a better situation for Wilson, and this was the worst situation for Wilson.
And this is that situation for Wilson that I talked about mid-season.
I will
Pittsburgh would
quibble very quickly here with a suggestion made by Nick Kosmider in a terrific piece today for The Athletic, kind of summarizing the competition at various positions going into training camp. And he contended at the top of his piece that it was more outlandish as opposed to Wilson's prognostication in his first press conference that the Broncos would win multiple Super Bowls under his direction.
Yeah.
It was even more outlandish to think of Wilson 2 years out not being on the team. I would disagree with that. I think the most outlandish comment was the one Wilson made saying they would win multiple Super Bowls. And apparently nobody tapped Russell Wilson on the shoulder before the press conference began and said, listen, this is a team that's gone 6 years in a row without making the playoffs. Let's talk about maybe getting back to the playoffs again before we start forecasting Super Bowls, of which you've won one in your career and probably should have won multiple Super Bowls. And that would have been the rather snarky follow-up question. Wait a minute, you're forecasting well into your 30s that you'll be leading a team to multiple Super Bowl wins when in your prime you got to 2 Super Bowls but only won one in Seattle. Maybe we ought to put on the brakes here a little bit. Well, we put on the brakes in a sense every Wednesday afternoon on Mile High Sports Radio at 5:30 for our Wellness Wednesday podcast with Dr. Rick Perea, our weekly checkup from the neck up. And we're glad to have Dr. P on the team. He was the chief psychologist for the world champion Denver Broncos back in 2015. He was the chief psychologist for the Colorado Rockies on their way to 2 straight years in the National League playoffs, hard as that is now to imagine. Yes, the Rockies were a playoff team in 2017 and 2018. And during that time, he also worked with the eventual world champion Denver Nuggets. He speaks to corporate audiences on a regular basis, but he takes the greatest pride in his work with youngsters, with adolescents, with people struggling in the classroom, maybe struggling on the athletic field too. Anything that Rick Perea knows is worth knowing, and he is so eager to pass it on. All you have to do is give him a call at 720-287-0933. That's 720-287-0933, or look him up at Dr. P at think1foryou.org. That's think1foryou.org.
Boy, the Rockies have been to the playoffs twice since the Broncos have won the Super Bowl. Yikes.
Yes.
Wow.
That is true. And the Nuggets have won a championship, and the Avalanche have won a Stanley Cup.
Well, the Avalanche are looking to get back to a Stanley Cup, and an interesting discussion resurfaces. An interview with a Russian hockey writer, Mikhail Cherkasov, who does podcast in Russian, talks to Russian players, had an opportunity before the playoffs began to talk with Valery Nichushkin and Yakov Trenin, another Russian player. But it was Nichushkin's part of the article that was very, very interesting, because there are some fascinating statements in there, and credit to Evan Rawal of Colorado Hockey Now, who put together the translation of the Russian and got that from a native Russian speaker. So I'll read it to you rather than play it, obviously, because it's in Russian. But Cherkasov talks specifically about some of the challenges the last playoffs, of course, which he ended up leaving the team out when they played Seattle and lost to the Kraken. So here is what Nichushkin said, translated from the Russian. It was the most difficult season. There were a lot of injuries in the team all season. I missed 2 months due to bursitis. I also had a shoulder injury which constantly bothered me. I always had problems sleeping, but because of the pain in my shoulder, the situation with my sleep got worse. They did an MRI and they couldn't decide whether to have surgery or not. In the end, they decided not to do it and gave me injections in my shoulder. These injections stopped helping, and they decided to inject me with another drug. When we flew to Seattle, they decided I would not play the match due to a shoulder injury because I needed not to bother my shoulder for a while until the drug starts working, and everyone on the team knew that I would not play until the end of the round. It put a lot of pressure on the psyche and was very annoying. I had friends in Seattle at the moment, and I made the wrong decision. We hung out with them at night, and in the morning I flew to Denver. The girl in the room had nothing to do with me. The club advised me not to give any comments, and I myself was not emotionally ready to explain all of this. This was probably the wrong decision, and it was necessary to tell the whole situation right away so that there weren't a bunch of different rumors. If we had made it to the second round, I would have been ready to play. This was recorded prior to this postseason run, in which the Avs were knocked out in the second round by the Stars, with Nichushkin getting suspended during that time. Prior to this season, so going back to last September, the training camp prior to the season, our RFD that we had on the show yesterday had an opportunity to hear a little bit from Nichushkin. Nichushkin spoke about the same situation that he could have played had they gotten past Seattle the year prior.
I think we both decided. So it's not only from me, there was a little conversation on that, and we did make that decision. If we make next round, I probably play.
So in this case now, multiple months apart, prior to the regular season starting and prior to the playoffs starting, Nichushkin has had the same story, that he was injured and that he and the Avs had agreed that if the second round would have come along, he would have had an opportunity to play. The Avs, specifically about the recent Russian interview, said they have no comment, but they never pushed back on the idea that Nichushkin was hurt. The question now is, for the Avs, who have reportedly have no interest in trading Nichushkin, and we know there is challenges. He's in stage 3. He's suspended at least until mid-November, and that's at the earliest without pay. But as we know, multiple things can be true at the same time. It is possible he was hurt and dealing with the shoulder injury and had injections and wasn't going to be able to play in that round. And it's also true that we know about the suspension. The question now that we don't have an answer for, that nobody's actually addressed, when was stage 1 of the suspension for Valeri Nichushkin?
I think we can infer from all that we now know that stage 1 took place over the course of the summer at roughly this time a year ago, and stage 1 is much easier to pass through than stage 2.
In other words, following
stage 2 is
incident,
easier to pass through than stage 3. I would have to assume that although the implication in January was that he was going into the program for the first time,
right,
that was not the first time. It
No.
was the second time, and he acknowledged, in a sense, that with all these injuries and all these shots he was taking and mixed with alcohol, he was in pretty bad shape at that point a year ago during the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs against Seattle. I don't know about coming back and playing in the second round. That's his story. I guess he had played through that injury for most of the year and played pretty well when he was healthy enough to dress out. I just don't know what to make of all of it. I think as far as it goes, it seems truthful enough. And in fact, speaking to a Russian reporter, the reports out of Russia seem to have a little more substance to them than the reports we have generally gotten.
Well, he's more
here.
comfortable speaking in Russian.
And I
to
did
Russian
think it was
reporters.
Interesting that he said we should have come out and told the story at the time, and we didn't.
Yes, that to me is
he
interesting.
could have
too.
and didn't, and the Avalanche could have and didn't. And I think if the Avalanche had said, listen, the best thing to do is get ahead of this, come out and talk about it and clarify, because otherwise it's going to be the lingering mystery of the offseason surrounding the Colorado Avalanche. And even going into the season, it was nice that the players in September welcomed him back with open arms. That was the quote from Nathan McKinnon. But I felt, and I think you did too, that the Avalanche and Nichushkin both made a mistake last year and not being more forthcoming. And even during training camp, when given the opportunity, he did not really want to get into it. Now he's opened up a little bit. I think that has to be a start in recovery from stage 3 and making your way through that stage to at least admit that, yes, January was stage 2, not stage 1. And last summer was when, not that he's been explicit about it, but I think the inference is that last summer was stage 1.
Have the Avalanche in retrospect here and kind
In
of knowing what we
retrospect, the
know,
Avalanche made a mistake
it feels like the Avalanche
and let their own players
have
down.
let Nichushkin down here.
Well,
in this
maybe
case.
let
Now-
Nichushkin
now,
down,
Nichushkin
but let their own players down.
Because the
Because players wondering what the
expectations-
heck's going on. Well,
Right.
what do you mean stage 3?
Yeah, and that's where I think there's been an error in communication, and that's a challenge because that may lead to something a little bit higher because we have seen, and I get it, these are isolated incidents, but the Nichushkin situation where it appears that the Avalanche probably could have been more forthcoming, and it would have helped not only Nichushkin likely, but the team. It also explains why the Avs do seem to have loyalty to Nichushkin beyond the fact that he's on the payroll for 6 more seasons at $6 million. They would like him to get better, and not just because he's an important player on the team, which he certainly is. But I liken this going to Jamal Murray a couple years ago as well, where Jamal Murray was not ready to play. And at another station, in another radio life where you and I were doing this show, the Nuggets management came on and basically put it on Jamal Murray and saying, well, Jamal Murray's
been cleared.
good to go. It's up to Jamal Murray, and made Jamal Murray look like he wasn't going to be a gamer, wasn't going to be tough, and letting the Nuggets teammates and the fans down. And if there's one thing you kind of knew about Jamal Murray, it's that he's a gamer. So that never made any sense either. But there kind of has been a pattern, and it only has happened in these sort of odd situations where Nichushkin in the case of the player assistance program, Murray when he had the significant injury that was going to take him out for a long time, that the organizations have not been forthcoming enough from the get-go. And instead of avoiding, in an effort to what I presume is to avoid a lot of rumor mongering, it creates it and it hurts their own guys. And I think there's a situation here where this kind of insight from Nichushkin, assuming he's being accurate, but he's telling the same story 9 months later, and it matches up with what we know, they have to be a little wiser about this. Now you've seen it on the Avs side and the Nuggets side, where the organization is trying to keep things in-house, but the end result is it doesn't stay in-house, and it just
Everything
gets worse.
gets out. You're
Everything
exactly
gets
right.
out, and trying to stay on top of it, it can be problematic. Transparency can be really helpful in these situations. And I think for the Avs going forward, especially when you talk about Nichushkin for the next 6 months, he can't be reinstated until November 13th at the earliest. I think that transparency is now critical, because if the Avs aren't going to explain it clearly, Nichushkin may very well do so because his career is hanging in the balance, and it would be human nature to try to get your
Well,
side out.
he better convince his teammates. Now, I know Jack Johnson is no longer
Right.
with the team, and he was the most explicit in his criticism of
and
Nichushkin.
hurt
He
in that regard
let
too.
the team down. And, Jack Johnson probably sensed it was his last chance at making a championship run in what has been a distinguished playing career. Then he now will presumably finish up in Columbus. He had been to Chicago after the Avs won the Cup, if I'm not mistaken, and came back to the Avs, and now is in Columbus. But I think it's fairly apparent, too, that some key members of the team were upset that for 2 years in a row they were let down by one of their most important players. And let
But
down,
it is interesting.
misled.
Yeah,
And
because
I'll
if he
tell you
really
one
was
thing
hurt
that
in the Seattle series and expected to maybe play in the next one, that's very different than it's a different, it's totally different concept.
Yeah, and all I know is human nature. If you've been had, you resent that.
Yep.
If you've been misled by people you trust, that is hard to overcome. And the Avalanche players trusted their teammate, who proved untrustworthy, and they trusted that the organization had a handle on the situation that they obviously didn't have.
It's going to be a fascinating offseason for the Avs, of course. The money tied up in both Nichushkin and Gabe Landeskog, both right now not on the books because of injury and suspension, would certainly arrive if either of those two become available to play. And it will be something to monitor for the Avs going forward as they try to make a run back to the Stanley Cup Finals with three of the best players in hockey and the defending Hart Trophy in tow. Your home is the most valuable asset that you will probably own. It's the most valuable asset that most of us will ever own. And if you're going to sell it, you need to make sure that you maximize that value. The Colorado home market, of course, has been crazy for years, but I know how to navigate it. And in a moment, you will too. Talk to my friends David and Mark at Key Real Estate Group's Colorado Luxury Home Team. And when I say Colorado's Luxury Home Team, it doesn't mean you have to be in the market for a luxury home or sell a luxury home. They'll work with you and give you the luxury service, that high-end luxury service, person to person, whether you're buying or selling. This is not one of the big realty companies. It's not one of the folks you're going to get whoever you talk to when you call in. When you need experts that know Colorado's market, and that means you need experience to ride all the highs and lows. That's two things, experience and stability. And we know the experience is there. They've spent 25 years in the same offices. Well, that's pretty stable too. They're privately owned, privately held. You will deal with them. Inventory, of course, is still low around the Denver metro area. Homes that are priced right still sell fast. So let David and Mark give you a free valuation on your home. Don't let yourself get shortchanged on one of the most important transactions of your life. Now that summer's here, folks are out looking every single day, so there is no reason to wait. Let Dave and Mark represent you to make sure you're getting everything that you deserve. Here's how to grab them. Call Dave and Mark at the Key Real Estate Group at 720-900-LIST. That's 720-900-LIST, or visit them today at keyrealestategroup.com. The Colorado Rockies, Sandy, fell today 8-1 to the Cincinnati Reds to lose that 4-game series, 3-1. They will move on to the Mets. We'll have an opportunity to talk with Lou Solomon of the Denver Gazette tomorrow about the Rockies and where they stand in their final series prior to the All-Star break. But the good news last night, the Rockies win the game 6-5. That's great, but they're still in last place and they're not going anywhere. The good news, again, is Kyle Freeland. Kyle Freeland gets his first win of the year, 6 2/3 innings pitched, scatters 8 hits, only 2 earned runs, 1 walk, 9 Ks. That's a new season high to get that first win. And the numbers for Freeland since coming back from the injury have been outstanding. In the past 4 starts since returning from the injured list, 5 earned runs in 26 and a third innings. That is an ERA of 1.72, 21 Ks, and 5 walks in that span. So strikeout to walk ratio, good. Almost striking out a guy an inning. Kyle Freeland has never been a big strikeout guy, but those numbers are outstanding. And the ERA simply can't be beat. Freeland looks like the Freeland of old all of a sudden.
With power pitching now a part of the repertoire, 9 strikeouts in 6 2/3 innings. We didn't even see that in 2018.
No.
We saw exceptional pitching at Coors Field, pretty good pitching on the road that year, but exceptional pitching at Coors Field. I think 2.75 was his ERA for the season in 2018 at Coors Field, and that's why he finished 4th in the Cy Young Award voting. But he's never been a strikeout pitcher. I'm not saying he is one now, but 9 strikeouts in 6 2/3 innings. He hasn't had many outings, if any, over the years that are any better than that.
No.
He did give up a home run, but only walked 1 against the 9 strikeouts, and battled through 6 2/3, throwing 93 pitches. Anything under 100, if you pass 6 innings and you've thrown fewer than 100 pitches, that's pretty good in this day and age, correct?
It is.
The last time I looked, 15 times 6 is 90. So he finished with 93 in 6 2/3. That's actually a little less than 15 pitches per inning if you average it all out. So he was efficient. He got strikeouts, and he got some help from a center fielder that some had forgotten was on the team at all.
Yeah.
Sam Hilliard. Had a couple of home runs.
Yeah, a couple of home runs subbing in for Brenton Doyle.
How many times have the Rockies in recent years gotten 2 home runs in a game out of the number 9 hitter?
You'd have to look it up. Baseball would have it, but it's not very common, that's for sure. But congratulations to Hilliard with the 2 home runs today. Plays in left, goes 0 for 3. The Rockies don't do much as you expect.
Yeah.
With the 8-1 loss, though, Michael Tolia, however, does go 1 for 2 with a walk and a homer, his 12th home run of the year, despite hitting only 186. So,
well,
you have to go
along
back
with hitting 186.
What are we talking
we
about?
see a lot of guys
the
with
Rob Deers of the world, those kind of guys.
He strikes out a ton. He's a true outcome guy. It's a home run or a strikeout. not and walk is a true outcome too, but he doesn't walk much.
He did today.
It's a home run and it's a strikeout. And I know he's young, but he's not a kid. And I wonder about the developmental possibilities.
Well, that would be
with
a
him.
Rockies thing in general. But you're right. Tolia's 25 already, and actually he'll turn 26 in just about a month.
So
I mean,
I'm saying this isn't
should
some
be in his
20,
close to his
21-year-old
prime,
kid,
right?
You know, he's getting close to what should be his prime. And wasn't he drafted twice by the Rockies? 3 years apart.
I believe that is
I'm
right.
correct on
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Because
they
he
were-
did go to UCLA in the intervening period.
Yeah,
He was drafted out of high school. He didn't sign.
they liked him quite a
He
bit.
went to UCLA and they drafted him. I can't remember if it was a first round pick. I think it might have been, actually.
But
going
there's
back
been a
to
lot of faith,
2019.
and the main reason was that power. And you're right, he was drafted by the Rockies in the 2016 draft. It was the 35th round, but he was
35th
drafted.
round, but then he was drafted again by the
Yes,
Rockies.
and then went
In
to UCLA.
First round.
Yeah, and then he was. Yeah, exactly. So
Right.
he was drafted then for the Rockies.
You know, I'm 66. My memory.
No,
comes
you're
and
right.
goes,
23rd overall pick 2 years later. So they loved him quite a bit. Now,
Yeah.
granted, weird scenario because he jumped in and it just had 41 games, and then the entire 2020 season was canceled in the minors by COVID.
Yes.
So
Correct.
certainly that hurts the development. The
Right.
power is there. The Rockies are probably doing the right thing by playing him, because I don't know what you can learn in the minors anymore necessarily. He's just going to have to adjust to major league pitching. The power is certainly there.
Yeah.
The question is, can you start getting the bat on the ball? But he's hardly the only Rocky with that problem, although 186 is particularly bad. Ezekiel Tovar still really slumping. 1 for 4 today, 3 more strikeouts. The wheels are coming off his season offensively, which is really a shame.
I don't understand that.
No,
I
and
really
it
don't.
shouldn't be fatigue at this point or anything like that, but all of a sudden just can't hit. But the Rockies again today, 13 strikeouts as a team to only 4 walks. That is going to be a disaster. When the Rockies get into double-digit strikeouts as a team, they don't win a lot of baseball games. Very few teams do. Austin Gomber, 4 earned runs allowed today in 5 innings. That is a quality start, technically, I guess. He struck out 5 in the 5 innings. It wasn't great. In this case, the reliever Molina was.
Oh, it's the innings total?
5.
That's not quality.
Oh, you're right. It's 3 and 5, which is the 4.5 ERA. You're right. So
3
not
and
quite.
6.
Okay,
and
so not
6.
quite
3
a
and
quality
6.
start.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
he-
Gomber drops to 2 and 6, 4.61. Molina comes in and in 2/3 of an inning gives up 4 earned runs. Hunter Green strikes out 10 of the Rockies in his 6 innings, absolutely dealing. This team just cannot seem to get it going. And then now you had, while doing the best job they could and getting, as I joked, getting the Reds close to 500. The Reds now 45 and 49. The Rockies will now head to New York to take on the Mets.
Well, they got the Reds out of 4th place and into 3rd for the
Yep.
time being, anyway.
Yep, and got more than a few of them hot, it would seem.
Yes, I think so, especially this kid who wasn't
Reese
exactly
Hines.
tearing up AAA, and then he comes up to the Reds, and he is doing his Barry Bonds.
As of today, the fastest major leaguer to 6 extra base hits and 2 steals in his career. I know it's kind of a weird stat, but the fastest major leaguer to do that, 6 extra base hits and 2 steals. He did it in 4 games. Guess who we just played against for 4 games? I mean, the Rockies surrendered that in its entirety. An all-time, fastest to allow player, extra base hits, 6+, and then 2+ steals.
Again, the reminder, as of right now in the National League, if you're playing 500 baseball, you're within 1 game of a wild card
One
spot.
game, and that would
That's 500 baseball. That's
the-
all it takes to be within 1 game,
Reds,
which
as it
is
stands
1
right
day of a playoff
The Reds
spot.
are only 3 out
That's
of a playoff spot.
exactly
45
right.
and 49.
That's
The
exactly
Mets,
right.
as it stands today, would hold one. And the Mets have had kind of a remarkable turnaround from their start. 47 and 45 now, tied with the Padres, but ahead in percentage points,
Yes.
511 to 510.
Correct. They are the 3rd
Just
wild
slightly.
card team.
So the
the New
Mets-
York Mets, who were given up for dead
in
and
April.
should have been, because they're 13 games out of first place in the
Right.
National League East. But In the wild card, they are right there. And it's a little like the Boston Red Sox, who aren't quite as far out of first place, 6.5 games in the American League East, but are right now by half a game the third wild card team in the American League. So you don't have to be a first place team or a second place team to be a wild card team. You can be a third place team. You can be the Mets, who until very recently were a fourth place team, and have recently, the last couple of weeks, edged ahead of the Washington Nationals, who themselves are now 5.5 out. I think we can count out Washington, Colorado, and Miami in the National League.
I agree.
In the American League, probably Tampa Bay, Texas, Detroit, Toronto, LA, Oakland, and the White Sox are out of it. You've got 5 teams going for the 3 wild card spots, and only 2.5 games separating the 5th of those teams, Houston, from Boston, the third wild card team right now. And again, we reiterate this point, but if the Rockies were even, let's say, 40-54 right now.
Yeah.
It'd be
not
7 games out, and there'd be a lot of teams to climb over, but that's 7 more wins.
14 games under 500, you'd still be alive. I mean, that's how bad it is. They will take on the Mets for this weekend series before taking the All-Star break, with Ryan McMahon joining the fray there. Tanner Gordon will take the hill on Friday in his second major league game against Shawn. And on Saturday, Ryan Feltner, who's had a rough year, will take on Christian Scott. And in the finale, Cal Quantrill, who got thumped his last outing, will take on Jose Quintana. You have to feel that the Mets are in pretty good position to maybe even sweep that series, which is something you never really expect in baseball. But the Rockies now have lost 4 of 5, lose 3 of 4 in Cincinnati. The road trip will continue against a better Mets team to finish the second half of the season. But good news for Kyle Freeland, who really, despite the fact the overall numbers are ugly, 1-3 with a 6 ERA, has completely turned around. Maybe not the season stats, but the way he looks. He looks healthy.
Yeah.
He looks like he's got all his stuff working right now, and he looks confident. That is great news, not only for the Rockies, who could use anything they can get, but for Kyle Freeland and for all the Rockies fans who root for the now 31-year-old for Freeland. So if he hadn't really turned things around, you might really start to worry. But a good sign there for Kyle Freeland. We'll see if he keeps it going in his next start after the All-Star break, when he gets a little bit of rest. Obviously, we will talk tomorrow about the Rockies. Well, Luke Zalman of the Denver Gazette will join us. He'll break down that series and what the Rockies might do in the trade market, what's going on with Ezekiel Tovar, a lot of the other things with the Rockies, and possibly even Herman Marquez's return in the offing, perhaps relatively soon. We'll talk about Luke. We'll talk about the Rockies with Luke tomorrow about that. Thanks to Cody Roark for joining us from New York. He's traveling. He popped in, talked about the Denver Broncos receiving core in particular, and a little bit about the defense. If you missed any part of the program, obviously, if you're on YouTube right now, you can just slide that thing right back and catch it again. You can also hit subscribe if you liked what you heard. That'll let you know when we're on next and what we'll be talking about before the show even begins. Danny Bailey is the man that makes everything work. Anything you see, everything you hear, it's because Danny Bailey put it together. Always appreciate all the work that Danny does, but mostly we appreciate you, because you're the ones listening to this, however you're doing it, whether it's on YouTube or Mile High Sports or on the app, or whether you're listening on the radio. We appreciate all of the ways that you turn into the program and make it the program that it is. We'll be back tomorrow with more, the final day of the final week before the Broncos start reporting to training camp at Dove Valley. He's Sandy Clough. I'm Shawn Drotar. We'll catch you then, but keep it right here, because this is Mile High Sports.